A basement in Indianapolis. October 27th, 1965. The evening light barely penetrates through a small, grimy window. The air is stale, permeated with smell no one should recognize. On the cold concrete floor, the body of a teenage girl lies motionless. Her skin is covered in wounds, burns, and words etched in fire. The responding officers will never forget what they see. One of them runs outside to vomit. Another leans against the wall, unable to process the scene. It will take the coroner days to catalog all the injuries. More than 150 distinct wounds. This wasn't murder. It was a prolonged torture that lasted 3 full months. The question that will haunt everyone is the same. How could this happen? We jump back 6 months. Spring of 1965. The Likens family lives a nomadic life that many would consider fascinating. Lester and Betty Likens work as ride operators at traveling fairs, traveling from city to city, following the carnival circuit throughout the American Midwest. It's a life of constant movement, neon lights, cotton candy, and organ music. Their 5 children no more parking lots than classrooms. Sylvia Marie Likens is 16 years old. She is the 3rd child, a slender teenager with brown hair and curious eyes who has learned to adapt quickly to new places. Her sister Jenny, just a year younger, is her constant companion. Jenny walks with difficulty due to the polio she contracted in childhood, and Sylvia is always by her side, protecting and helping her. The sisters share secrets, dreams, and the hope of one day having a more stable life. The other 3 older siblings have already gone their own way, leaving Sylvia and Jenny as the only ones still accompanying their parents on the road. July 1965. The Likens family arrives in Indianapolis, a city that will offer them a full season of work. But there's a logistical problem Lester and Betty have faced before. The teenagers can't travel in the RV during the busiest months. They need stability. They need to attend school, at least temporarily. Betty Likens meets Gertrude Banaszewski through mutual acquaintances. Gertrude is a 37-year-old woman who looks older than her years. Life has beaten her down repeatedly. Twice divorced, a mother of 7, she lives in a ramshackle 2-story house at 3850 East New York Street. It is a rundown structure in a working-class neighborhood where tenements are pressed up against one another and children play on unpaved streets. Gertrude suffers from severe asthma and is constantly short of breath. She smokes compulsively despite her respiratory condition. Her face shows signs of chronic exhaustion, with deep dark circles under her eyes and a perpetually tense expression. Financially, she is on the verge of collapse. She depends on social assistance and the odd jobs her older children get. When Betty proposes leaving Sylvia and Jenny in her care, Gertrude agrees. The agreement is simple: $20 a week for both girls. Food, shelter, and supervision until the Likens return from their tour. The last days of July. Sylvia and Jenny push their small suitcases toward the house on East New York Street. The wooden structure needs paint. The porch creaks underfoot. Inside, the clutter is overwhelming. Piled clothes, dirty dishes, the musty smell. Gertrude shows them a room on the 2nd floor that they will share with 2 of her daughters, Paula and Stephanie. It's cramped, with 2 single beds and poor ventilation. The windows have torn curtains. Lester and Betty Likens say goodbye with quick hugs. They promise to send the money every week, without fail. They promise to return soon. Sylvia hugs her mother tightly, feeling a restlessness she can't name. Jenny watches the scene with wide eyes, holding her crutch. The door closes. The parents leave. The Likens sisters are now in the hands of a stranger. August begins quietly. Sylvia and Jenny meet the other children in the house. Paula Banaszewski is 18 and pregnant. Stephanie is 15, almost the same age as Sylvia. The others are younger. Marie, 11, Shirley, 10, James, 8, and the youngest, Dennis, is only 1. Domestic chaos is the norm. Gertrude screams constantly over messes, noise, or anything. The children have learned to move quickly to avoid her wrath. Paula, the eldest, has an explosive temper inherited from her mother. Stephanie is more reserved, but obeys without question. Sylvia tries to adapt. She helps with the housework, plays with the younger children, and tries to earn her place. Jenny, limited by her mobility, does what she can The sisters sleep together, whispering in the dark about how much they miss their parents, about when they'll return. At first, everything seems manageable. Difficult, yes. Uncomfortable, of course, but manageable. Second week of August. The mail arrives. Gertrude anxiously sorts through the envelopes. She looks for the envelope with the promised $20. It's not there. She checks again. Nothing. Her face hardens. Her breathing becomes heavier, wheezing. That night, Gertrude confronts Sylvia and Jenny. Her voice is harsh and accusatory. She tells them their parents are irresponsible, that they've abandoned them, and that now she has to support them without getting anything in return. The girls try to explain that it must be a mistake, that the money will come, that their parents always keep their promises. Gertrude doesn't listen to explanations. In her mind, a narrative is already formed. These girls are a burden. They're a weight she can't bear. And someone must pay for that inconvenience. That night, Sylvia receives her first slap. It's violent, unexpected. Her cheek burns. Jenny screams, but Gertrude silences her with a threatening look. It's just the beginning. The following days show a disturbing transformation in Gertrude Banaszewski. The facade of the responsible caregiver crumbles. The slaps become frequent. The accusations are constant. Sylvia is called a whore, a liar, and a trash. There is no specific reason for these insults. They simply ooze out of Gertrude like venom. Jenny watches in terror as her sister becomes the prime target. She tries to intervene, but her physical condition makes her vulnerable. Gertrude mostly ignores her, focusing all her fury on Sylvia. The other children in the house begin to notice the change. Some are uncomfortable. Others, curiously, seem interested. Gertrude has a perverse ability to manipulate her own children, to make them complicit in her cruelty. Sylvia still doesn't understand the magnitude of what she's starting. She still believes that if she behaves, if she helps more, if she's more obedient, things will improve. She still holds out hope that her parents will arrive soon and take her away from this house. She doesn't yet know that she's trapped in a nightmare from which she won't be able to escape. Mid-August 1965, Gertrude Banaszewski becomes obsessed with the sexuality of the teenage girls under her roof. In her twisted mind, Sylvia represents everything she hates. Youth potential, budding beauty. She begins to publicly accuse her in front of the other children of being promiscuous, of being impure, of being the cause of all the problems in the house. The accusations are baseless. Sylvia is a normal teenager who has barely had any romantic interactions. But the truth doesn't matter in this house. Gertrude creates her own reality and forces everyone to live within it. One evening, Paula Banaszewski returns home visibly upset. Her boyfriend has dumped her. Instead of processing her grief in a healthy way, Paula looks for a scapegoat. Gertrude whispers something in her ear. She tells her that Sylvia has been spreading rumors about her, calling her a whore. It's an outright lie, but Paula wants to believe it. The pregnant 18-year-old girl hits Sylvia with disproportionate violence. She punches her in the stomach and in the face. Sylvia falls to the ground, protecting herself as best she can. Gertrude watches with approval, even satisfaction. This is a turning point. The violence is no longer just coming from Gertrude. Now others are joining in. Late August, Sylvia is sent to the basement for the first time as punishment. The wooden stairs creak as she descends, pushed by Gertrude. The underground space is damp and cold. A single light bulb hangs from the ceiling, providing dim light. The floor is bare concrete. There are a few old boxes, rusty tools, and accumulated trash. Gertrude orders her to stay there for hours. No food, no water. Alone in the dark when they turn out the lights. Sylvia sits on the cold floor, hugging her knees, trying to stay warm. She hears the footsteps upstairs, the muffled voices. Life going on without her. The basement will become a recurring place of torment, a space where Gertrude can exercise her cruelty away from outside eyes, a place where the screams are not so easily heard from the street. Early September. The Banaszewski house becomes a strangely popular hangout among the neighborhood children. Gertrude, in her need for an audience and validation, allows other children to come and go freely. Some are 10 years old, others 15 or 16. Among them are Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, two local teenagers who become frequent visitors. Coy is a 15-year-old athletic judo practitioner. Richard is 16, thinner, and more of a follower than a leader. Both develop a morbid fascination with the goings-on in the house. Gertrude allows them, even encourages them, to participate in Sylvia's discipline. She tells them that the child is bad, that she needs correction, that they are doing service. The teenagers, lacking adequate parental supervision and trapped in their own moral confusion, accept the role. Coy practices his judo moves on Sylvia, throwing her against walls and knocking her to the floor. Richard watches, initially uncomfortable, but gradually numb to the violence. The house becomes a theater of cruelty where multiple actors participate in a play without a moral script. Mid-September, Gertrude introduces a new method of torture, burning with cigarettes. She smokes constantly. There are always lit cigarettes in the house. One day, in a fit of rage, she presses the lit end against Sylvia's arm. The girl screams. The smell of burning skin fills the room. Gertrude smiles. She's discovered a new way to inflict pain that doesn't leave marks as obvious as blows, although the small, circular burns multiply on Sylvia's skin. Soon, others imitate the behavior. Paula takes a cigarette and burns Sylvia. The younger siblings normalize the violence, begin to see this as a game. Even some neighborhood children participate, pressing cigarettes against the victim while others watch. Sylvia develops dozens of burns on her arms, legs, and torso. Each one is a burning reminder of her powerlessness. One September afternoon, Sylvia tries to escape. She takes advantage of a moment of distraction and runs toward the front door. She almost reaches it. Her fingers brush the handle. Paula catches her. She drags her back. The punishment is brutal and public. Gertrude calls all the children into the house. She tells them to watch what happens to those who try to escape. Sylvia is thrown down the basement stairs. Her body hits each wooden step. She falls in a heap at the bottom, bruised and sore. Gertrude climbs down behind her and continues beating her with a wooden board. The message is clear. There is no escape. September rolls around and the school year begins. Sylvia and Jenny enroll at Arsenal Technical High School, the same school Stephanie Banaszewski and several other neighborhood children attend. For Sylvia, school represents a temporary respite. It's time when she's not under Gertrude's direct supervision, but the marks on her body are becoming increasingly difficult to hide. She wears long sleeves even on hot days. She avoids physical education class. Some classmates notice something strange. They see her as thin, quiet, with occasional visible bruises. But no one asks directly. In 1965, intervention in other people's family affairs is rare. Beating children is considered a private matter, not a public one. Stephanie Banaszewski, who shares Sylvia's class, remains silent about what's happening at home. She's caught between family loyalty and the knowledge that something terribly wrong is happening. She chooses silence. Jenny, in her own living room, suffers from the helplessness of knowing she can't protect her sister. Every day she prays for her parents' return soon. Late September, Gertrude implements a new form of control, food deprivation. Sylvia is excluded from family meals. While others eat, she must watch from the basement or a corner. Occasionally, leftovers are thrown to her. Other times, days go by without her receiving adequate food. Her body begins to show signs of malnutrition. Her cheeks sag. Her ribs become visible. Her clothes become too big. Her physical weakness makes her even more vulnerable to attacks. At school, Sylvia sometimes accepts food from classmates who offer it to her. She devours her lunches with desperation that some notice but don't fully understand. Hunger is added to the list of tortures. It's not just physical violence. It's a systematic attack on their very existence. Early October 1965, Sylvia, in a moment of desperation, tries to write a letter to her parents. She finds a crumpled piece of paper and a pencil. With trembling hands, she begins to write, "Mom, Dad, please come for me. Please." He can't finish it. Gertrude discovers his attempt. She rips the paper from his hands and tears it up in front of his face. She tells him that his parents will never come, that they've abandoned him, that no one loves him, that he's trash, that no one will ever claim. Gertrude destroys any hope Sylvia holds. It's a calculated psychological cruelty designed to break her spirit as much as the blows break her body. That night, in the basement, Sylvia cries until she runs out of tears. She's beginning to believe there's no way out, that this is her destiny, that she will die in this house. Paula Banaszewski, now 8 months pregnant, finds perverse entertainment in tormenting Sylvia. She invents cruel games. She forces Sylvia to remove her clothes and parade naked while others mock. She forces her to perform strenuous physical exercises until she collapses. One day, Paula decides that Sylvia must insert a Coca-Cola bottle into her vagina. It's rape disguised as punishment. Other children watch the scene. Some laugh nervously. Others look at the floor, uncomfortable but silent. Sexual degradation becomes another component of the horror. There is no part of Sylvia left unviolated, unattacked, undestroyed. Mid-October, Gertrude has an idea that will solidify her place in the history of human cruelty. She decides to permanently mark Sylvia with a message. Heat a sewing needle over a fire. With the heated tip, he begins to carve letters into Sylvia's abdomen. The letters form the words, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it." The process takes hours. Sylvia screams with each letter. Gertrude works methodically, like a macabre artist creating her masterpiece. When she tires, she hands a needle to Richard Hobbs to continue. The teenager, completely morally numb, agrees and continues carving the letters into the agonizing skin. The wound becomes infected almost immediately. The surrounding skin becomes inflamed, red, and pus-like. Sylvia develops a fever. Her body tries to fight the infection, but it's too weak, too malnourished, too broken. Late October, Sylvia, weakened and ill, loses control of her bladder. It's an inevitable consequence of extreme trauma, malnutrition, and constant terror. Gertrude reacts with unbridled fury. She drags her into the bathroom and forces her into a bathtub filled with scalding water. Sylvia screams in pain as her skin scalds. Gertrude then drains the hot water and fills the bathtub with ice water, submerging Sylvia until she shivers uncontrollably. Thermal shock is another form of torture. Sylvia's body can't regulate its temperature. It goes from burning to freezing in minutes. Her heart beats erratically. Her breathing becomes shallow. Jenny Likens watches her sister's deterioration with paralyzing horror. Every day, Sylvia grows thinner, weaker, more distant. Her eyes, once bright and curious, are now dull and sunken. Jenny wants to help, but she's terrified. Gertrude has made it clear that if she interferes, if she speaks out, if she tries to escape, she'll suffer the same fate. The threat is real and tangible. Jenny has seen what they're capable of. Furthermore, her polio makes her physically vulnerable. She can't run. She can't fight. She can barely walk unaided. If Gertrude decides to attack her, she has no defense. So Jenny remains silent, a silence that will haunt her for the rest of her life. A silence that saved her life but condemned her sisters. Every night, lie in the bed they use to share, Jenny whispers promises to Sylvia. She promises that when her parents return, everything will be over. She promises that Sylvia will heal. She promises that they will forget this nightmare. They are promises that both know could be lies. The last days of October, Sylvia can barely move. She is permanently confined to the basement. Her body is covered with wounds in various stages of healing and reinfection. The burns, the bruises, the cuts, the cigarette burns, the words carved into her abdomen. Everything forms a map of unimaginable suffering. He's almost completely stopped eating. His body is shutting down. His organs are beginning to fail. The infection is spreading through his system. Gertrude, in a moment of apparent awareness of the gravity of the situation, tries to formulate a plan. Not to save Sylvia, but to avoid consequences for herself. She invents a story. Sylvia is a fugitive who has escaped with gang members. The wounds are either self-inflicted or caused by these imaginary criminals. He forces Sylvia to write a letter under his dictation, a false confession about her supposedly promiscuous life and her planned escape. Sylvia, barely conscious, tries to obey, but her hand shakes so much she can barely hold a pencil. October 26, 1965. Gertrude decides that Sylvia must escape to make her fabricated story credible. She instructs Richard Hobbs and his 12-year-old son, Johnny Banaszewski, to take Sylvia outside and abandon her somewhere remote. The teenagers try to move Sylvia. They dress her in dirty clothes and drag her toward the basement stairs. But Sylvia can't walk. Her legs aren't responding. Her body is too destroyed. They drop her. They try again. It's useless. Sylvia is dead weight, literally. Frustrated and scared, the boys return her to the basement. They tell Gertrude that the plan won't work, that Sylvia can't move, that she's dying. Gertrude comes down the stairs. She looks at the little girl she has tortured for 3 months. Sylvia looks at her with eyes that no longer reflect fear, only emptiness, a resigned acceptance. Gertrude goes back upstairs. She doesn't call a doctor. She doesn't call an ambulance. She does nothing except wait. Wait for Sylvia's body to finally give out. October 27th, 1965. Early morning. The basement is plunged into darkness. Sylvia lies on the concrete floor, her breathing shallow and erratic. Each inhalation is a struggle. Her body, destroyed by months of systematic torture, is in the final stages of closure. The infection from the wounds etched into his abdomen has spread throughout his system. He has a high fever. His heart beats weakly, trying to pump blood through a malnourished and traumatized body. Internal bleeding, caused by repeated blows, has created accumulations of blood in his tissues. Sylvia is semi-conscious. Sometimes she mumbles incomprehensible words. Other times, she remains completely motionless. No one is with her. She is alone in the darkness, as she has been so many times during these endless 3 months. Early morning, someone goes down to the basement, perhaps to check if Sylvia is still breathing. They find she has completely lost control of her bodily functions. There's feces and urine. Her body can no longer maintain any dignity. The person goes up and reports to Gertrude. The woman comes down, looking at the scene with disgust, not remorse. She orders someone to clean up the mess. Sylvia is shaken roughly. She moans in pain. It's the last anyone will hear of her. Over the next few hours, Sylvia Marie Likens stops struggling. Her breathing becomes shallower. Her heart beats slower and slower. There is no dramatic moment, no inspiring last word, just a gradual fading away. Around 2:30 in the afternoon on October 27th, Sylvia's heart stopped. She was 16 years old. She had been under Gertrude Banaszewski's care for exactly 3 months. 90 days that felt like an eternity. Evening of October 27th. Gertrude Banaszewski makes a phone call that will change everything. She calls the Indianapolis Police Department. Her voice is shaky, acting panicky. There's a little girl here. She's sick. We need help. Police officers arrive within minutes at 3850 East New York Street. Gertrude greets them at the door with a prepared performance. She tells them that Sylvia has been involved with gang members, that she's been coming and going, and that she arrived a few hours ago in terrible condition. He hands him the letter he forced Sylvia to write, the alleged confession. He tries to sell them his fabricated story. The officers listen, but something doesn't add up. The letter's language seems too adult for a teenager. The story has glaring holes. One of the officers asks where the girl is. Gertrude leads them to the basement. The officers descend the basement stairs. The light from the bulb illuminates the scene. What they see momentarily paralyzes them. On the ground lies the body of Sylvia Likens. She is emaciated to the point of extreme thinness. Her skin shows a mosaic of wounds, bruises in all stages of healing, circular cigarette burns covering her limbs, deep cuts, and areas of torn skin. Her face is swollen beyond recognition. Her lips are cracked and bleeding. But it's her abdomen that's most striking. The words etched with a hot needle are infected, oozing, swollen. I'm a prostitute and proud of it. A message of hate permanently etched into dead flesh. One of the officers, a 20-year veteran of the force, runs out of the basement and vomits in the backyard. He's never seen anything like this in his career. Another officer leans against the basement wall, trying to process what he's seeing. They immediately call for reinforcements and the coroner's office. The house quickly fills with police officers, detectives, and forensic personnel. They begin questioning everyone present. There are several children in the house: Gertrude's children, Jenny Likens, and some neighborhood children. The stories are confusing and contradictory. Some children try to protect Gertrude, repeating the gang members' narrative. Others, especially the younger ones, can't maintain the lie and begin to reveal fragments of the truth. Jenny Likens, terrified and in shock, finally speaks. Tears streaming down her face, she tells a detective, "They hurt her. Everyone hurt her." It's the testimony that breaks the case. The detectives interrogate Gertrude. Her story crumbles under the weight of inconsistencies. Question after question, her elaborate narrative contradicts itself. The investigators see the falsehood in every word. Within hours, the arrests begin. Night of October 27th. Gertrude Banaszewski is arrested and handcuffed. She shows no particular emotion. She simply asks who will take care of her children. Concern for Sylvia, whom she tortured to death, is completely absent from her behavior. Paula Banaszewski is also arrested, despite her advanced pregnancy. The officers find her surprisingly defiant, showing no remorse. Stephanie, although present during much of the abuse, is not initially arrested due to her less direct involvement. Detectives search for the neighborhood teenagers. Richard Hobbs is found at his home that same night. Coy Hubbard is located the next day. Both are arrested. Johnny Banaszewski, just 12 years old, is also detained. In total, 5 people are formally charged with the murder of Sylvia Marie Likens. October 28th. The Marion County Coroner's Office performs the autopsy. Forensic pathologist Dr. Paul Kehoe meticulously documents each wound. The process takes hours. The final report is devastating. More than 150 separate wounds in various stages of healing. Cigarette burns on the arms, legs, torso, and face. Severe bruises indicating repeated blunt force trauma. Rib fractures. Subdural hemorrhage. Brain damage from repeated head trauma. The words massive bacterial infection etched into the abdomen. The official cause of death: shock and cerebral hemorrhage combined with severe malnutrition and multiple traumas. But Dr. Kehoe added a note to his report that summarizes the true nature of the case. This child was systematically tortured over an extended period. Sylvia's weight at death, 40 kilograms. She had lost more than 10 kilograms during the 3 months at the Banaszewski house. The Likens are in California, working at a fair when they get the call. The Indianapolis police inform them they must return immediately. There's an emergency concerning their daughters. Lester and Betty Likens travel frantically back to Indiana. During the trip, they receive the full news: Sylvia is dead. Jenny is alive but traumatized. And what happened to Sylvia is unimaginable. When they finally arrive in Indianapolis, they are taken to identify the body. Betty Likens collapses at the sight of her daughter. The body is so disfigured by injuries that she can barely recognize her. Lester remains silent, his face stony, but tears flow freely. Guilt will consume them for the rest of their lives. Why did they trust a stranger? Why didn't they check on their daughter's well-being more frequently? Why was the money delayed in those critical weeks? These are questions without satisfactory answers. November 1965. News of Sylvia Likens' murder spreads like wildfire through Indianapolis. Local newspapers publish the first stories. The headlines are chilling: teenager tortured to death, horror in Indianapolis basement, the most brutal crime in Indiana history. The details, though partly censored to protect public sentiment, are graphic enough to horrify the community. People are wondering how something like this could have happened, how multiple children and teenagers were involved, how neighbors failed to notice, how the system failed so completely. The house on East New York Street becomes a macabre attraction. People drive there to see it, to stand in front of the decaying structure and try to understand the evil that occurred inside. Some leave flowers on the sidewalk. Others simply observe in silence. The question everyone asks is the same: how could this happen? Marion County prosecutors face a complex case. They have 5 defendants of varying ages and levels of involvement. Gertrude Banaszewski, as the instigator and principal perpetrator, faces first-degree murder charges. Paula Banaszewski faces the same charges due to her active and violent participation. Richard Hobbs and Coy Hubbard, both teenagers, are also accused of murder. Johnny Banaszewski, only 12 years old at the time of the crime, presents a legal dilemma. Can a child of that age be tried for murder? Prosecutors ultimately decide to charge him as well, albeit with considerations given his age. Stephanie Banaszewski is called as the prosecution's star witness. In exchange for her testimony, she faces no charges, although her passive participation and silence make her morally complicit. The trial is scheduled to begin in April 1966. Defense attorneys face a virtually indefensible case. The physical evidence is overwhelming. The photographs of Sylvia's body are so graphic that some potential jurors recuse themselves after viewing them. The testimony of Jenny Likens and other children who witnessed the abuse is consistent and detailed. Gertrude's defense strategy attempts to portray her as a sick, overwhelmed, and mentally unstable woman. Her lawyers argue that she suffered from severe depression, that her asthma and desperate financial situation led to a mental breakdown. They attempt to present her not as a calculating monster, but as a broken woman who lost control. It's a weak strategy, but it's all they have. For Paula, the defense is similar. A pregnant young woman, influenced by her mother, without the maturity to understand the magnitude of her actions. Neighborhood teens claim they were manipulated by Gertrude, who believed they were helping discipline a troubled child, and who didn't understand they were participating in a murder. May 1966. Jenny Likens, now 16, takes a stand. She walks with difficulty toward the witness chair, her expression more evident under the stress. She glances briefly at Gertrude, who avoids her gaze. The prosecutor asks her questions carefully. Jenny describes the 3 months of horror. Her voice trembles but remains steady. She recounts how Sylvia was beaten daily, how she was burned with cigarettes, how she was deprived of food, how she was branded with a hot needle, described the gradual escalation, how it began with slapping and grew into systematic torture, how multiple people participated, how no one intervened to stop it. When asked why she didn't ask for help, Jenny bursts into tears. "I was scared," she says simply. "I was afraid they'd do the same thing to me." The courtroom is completely silent. Some jurors have tears in their eyes. The defense tries to discredit her testimony during cross-examination, suggesting she's exaggerating and misinterpreting events. But Jenny doesn't waver. She's lived through this nightmare. She knows every detail with terrifying clarity. The prosecutor presents the photographs of Sylvia's body as evidence. He warns the jury and those present about their graphic nature. Some spectators leave the courtroom. Others cover their eyes. The images show Sylvia's emaciated body on the autopsy table. Every wound is visible. The circular cigarette burns covering her limbs in a grotesque pattern. The massive bruises in shades of purple and yellow, the deep cuts, the areas where her skin was torn away. But it's the photographs of the abdomen that are most striking. The words etched with a hot needle are clearly visible, swollen with infection. "I'm a prostitute and proud of it." A permanent message of hate in dead flesh. The medical examiner testifies about each wound. He explains that many were in various stages of healing, indicating they were inflicted over an extended period. He testifies that Sylvia would have experienced extreme and constant pain for weeks. Gertrude looks away as the photographs are shown. Paula remains motionless, expressionless. The teenagers seem to grasp, perhaps for the first time, the true magnitude of what they have done. June 1966. Gertrude Banaszewski takes a stand in her own defense. It's a risky move, but her legal team feels they have no other option. They need to somehow humanize her for the jury. Gertrude testifies about her difficult life. Divorces, financial struggles, health problems, the stress of raising 7 children alone. She cries when talking about her desperate situation. She attempts to portray Sylvia as a troubled child who constantly defied her, provoked her, and lied. The prosecutor tears her apart during cross-examination. He asks her specifically about individual acts of torture. Why did she burn Sylvia with cigarettes? Why did she carve words into her body? Why did she deprive her of food, and medical care. Gertrude has no coherent answers. She stammers out contradictory excuses. She repeatedly contradicts herself. Her testimony, rather than generating sympathy, reinforces a perception of her as a monster. Paula testifies briefly. Her strategy is similar, blaming the pregnancy, emotional stress, and her mother's influence. It's equally ineffective. The teenagers present a more convincing defense. They argue that they were manipulated, that Gertrude constantly told them Sylvia was evil and needed discipline, and that they thought they were helping. It's a defense that has some psychological merit, but it doesn't absolve their active participation in the torture. May 19, 1966. After 8 days of deliberation, the jury returns with its verdicts. Gertrude Baniszewski, guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupts in murmurs. Gertrude shows no visible reaction. Paula Baniszewski, guilty of second-degree murder. Her pregnancy evidently drew some consideration from the jury. Richard Hobbs, Coy Hubbard, and Johnny Baniszewski, guilty of murder. The jury considered their age and level of tampering as mitigating factors. The sentencing phase begins immediately. The judge imposes the most severe sentences allowed by Indiana law. Gertrude Baniszewski, life sentence without parole, sent to the Indiana Correctional Institution for Women. Paula Baniszewski, life sentence with a possibility of parole after serving a set minimum. The 3 male adolescents received sentences ranging from 2 to 21 years, depending on their specific level of involvement. As the sentences are read, Lester and Betty Likens, sitting in the gallery, embrace. There is no satisfaction on their faces, only exhaustion. No sentence will bring Sylvia back. No punishment will erase what she suffered. Jenny Likens, also present, remains silent. She has testified, told the truth, seen justice served. But the victory feels hollow. Her sister is dead. That reality doesn't change. Sylvia Likens' trial is over, but her story is just beginning to resonate in the American public consciousness. After the trial, Jenny Likens tries to rebuild her life. She is adopted by a family in the Indianapolis area. She changes her name to escape the public stigma. She tries to be a normal teenager, but normalcy is impossible after what she's been through. He suffers constant nightmares. He sees the basement in his dreams. He hears Sylvia's screams. He wakes up sweating, shaking, blaming himself for not having done more to save his sister. Therapists try to help her process the trauma, but in 1966, treatment for PTSD is in its infancy. Society doesn't fully understand the psychological impact of witnessing extreme violence for prolonged periods. Jenny eventually marries and has children of her own. She fiercely protects her privacy. She rarely speaks publicly about what happened. When she does, it's only to honor Sylvia's memory and to advocate for stronger protections for children. She carried survivor's guilt until her death in June 2004 at the age of 54. On her deathbed, according to family members, her last coherent words were, "I'm sorry, Sylvia." Lester and Betty Likens never recover from the loss of Sylvia or the guilt associated with their decision to leave her in Gertrude's care. Their marriage, already strained by their nomadic lifestyle, collapses completely under the weight of trauma and mutual guilt. They divorced in 1967. Lester fell into a deep depression. He abandoned the fair circuit. He worked irregular jobs, unable to maintain stability. He drank excessively. The image of Sylvia on that autopsy table haunted him until his death. Betty tries to rebuild herself, but the community judges her harshly. What mother leaves her daughters with a stranger for months? How could she not notice the signs when she visited or called them? 1960 society doesn't easily forgive mothers who fail to protect their children. Both die relatively young, their lives shortened by the weight of grief and guilt. They never fully forgive Gertrude. But more importantly, they never forgive themselves. Gertrude Baniszewski's children face varied fates. Some change their names and disappear into anonymity. Stephanie Baniszewski, who testified against her mother, lives with complex guilt. She knew what was happening. She witnessed the torture, and she did nothing effective to stop it. She marries, has children, and tries to build a normal life. But the knowledge of what she allowed to happen haunts her. In subsequent interviews, Decades later, she will express deep remorse, but also point to her own fear and the controlling dynamics Gertrude exerted over the family. The youngest children, who were between 1 and 10 years old during the torture, suffer complex trauma. Some develop mental health issues. Others struggle with addiction. All bear the stigma of being the children of one of America's most infamous killers. Paula Baniszewski, released on parole in 1972 after serving part of her sentence, changes her name to Paula Pace. She moves to Iowa and works as a school teacher. When her parents discover her real identity in 1917, there is a massive scandal. She is forced to resign. She dies in 1990 of cancer, having lived in relative anonymity after the scandal. Richard Hobbs and Coy Hubbard serve their sentences and are released in their 20s. Both struggle with reintegration into society. How do you cope knowing you participated in the torture and murder of an innocent teenager? Richard Hobbs died young, at the age of 21, just 2 years after his release. The circumstances of his death are obscure, but friends say he never overcame the guilt of what he had done. Coy Hubbard was released in 1978. He attempted to build a life, but had multiple encounters with the legal system for other minor offenses. He died in 2007. In interviews prior to his death, he expressed remorse but also attempted to minimize his involvement, a cognitive dissonance common in perpetrators who cannot reconcile their actions with their self-image. Johnny Baniszewski, the youngest of the convicts, completes his sentence and is released. He legally changes his name. He becomes publicly invisible. He is said to be living somewhere in the Midwest under a completely new identity. The case of Sylvia Likens exposes massive failures in multiple child protection systems. Teachers at Arsenal Technical High School saw Sylvia bruised, emaciated, and clearly in trouble. None reported their suspicions to authorities. Neighbors heard screams coming from the Baniszewski house. Some saw Sylvia with visible injuries. No one called the police. In the culture of 1965, intervention in other people's family affairs was considered inappropriate. "It's none of my business" was a common philosophy. The case is prompting legislative changes in Indiana and other states. Mandatory reporting laws for teachers and medical professionals are being strengthened. Clearer protocols for investigating suspected child abuse are being created. Anonymous reporting hotlines are being established. But these reforms come too late for Sylvia. His death becomes a catalyst for protections that could have saved her life. Gertrude Baniszewski spent 18 years at the Indiana Correctional Institution for Women. Inside the prison, she was considered a model inmate. She worked in the library. She participated in educational programs. She stayed out of trouble. But among the inmates, she is despised. Criminals have their own moral hierarchy, and those who harm children are at the lowest level. Gertrude is physically attacked several times by other inmates. She is kept in special protection during parts of her sentence. In 1985, Gertrude was incredibly released on parole. The decision sparked widespread outrage. Jenny Likens testified at the parole hearing, pleading for Gertrude to remain incarcerated. Lester Likens, already very ill, also appealed against her release. But the parole board determines that Gertrude has served enough time and demonstrated rehabilitation. She is released and moved to Iowa under an assumed name, Nadine Van Fossen. June 4, 1990. Gertrude Baniszewski dies of lung cancer at her home in Iowa. She is 61 years old. She has lived the past 5 years in relative anonymity, although some neighbors eventually discovered her true identity and confronted her. Her death has generated mixed reactions. Some feel justice has finally been served. Others feel she was never properly punished for her crimes. Her release after only 18 years for such a horrendous crime is considered by many to be a slap in the face to Sylvia's memory. There is no public funeral. There is no obituary in the major newspapers. Gertrude Baniszewski disappears from this world with as little ceremony as she accorded Sylvia Likens when she left to die in that cold basement 25 years earlier. The Likens case has become a subject of study in law schools, social work programs, and police academies. It is used to teach about the dangers of diffusion of responsibility, where multiple witnesses fail to act because they assume someone else will. The psychology of gang abuse, where individuals who would not normally commit violence are drawn into participating in a group setting, systemic failures in child protection, and the importance of mandatory reporting, the effects of prolonged trauma on victims and survivors. Books are written. Documentaries are produced. The case is referenced in discussions about the nature of human evil, about how ordinary people can commit extraordinarily cruel acts under certain circumstances. Sylvia Likens, who simply wanted to be a normal teenager, posthumously becomes a symbol for all victims of child abuse and systemic neglect. His death, though tragic, was not entirely in vain. It changed laws. It changed protocols. It saved future lives. But that doesn't bring her back. Psychologists and criminologists have studied Gertrude Baniszewski's case for decades, trying to understand what transformed her from a struggling mother into a sadistic torturer. The profile that emerges is complex. Gertrude wasn't a classic psychopath. She wasn't completely devoid of empathy for others, particularly her own children. She didn't torture for sexual pleasure or obvious sadistic gratification. So what motivated her? Experts identify several converging factors: extreme and chronic economic stress that erodes mental stability, debilitating physical illness that generates constant frustration and a sense of loss of control, a history of abusive relationships that normalizes violence as a response to stress. But perhaps the most significant factor is displacement. Gertrude projected all her anger about her own life, her own powerlessness, her own failure onto Sylvia. The teenager became a vessel for everything Gertrude hated about herself: lost youth, squandered opportunities, faded beauty. Sylvia's torture was, in a twisted sense, an act of projected self-punishment. But Gertrude didn't act alone. The Likens case is terrifying precisely because it involved multiple perpetrators: her own children, neighborhood teenagers, some as young as 10. How did so many people participate in something so patently evil? The answer lies in the psychology of group violence. Gertrude established what psychologists call a deviant norm within her home. She gradually normalized violence against Sylvia, first with slapping, then with more severe beatings, slowly escalating to outright torture. The children in the home, especially her own children, were conditioned to view Sylvia as different, as deserving of punishment. Gertrude constantly reinforced this narrative, calling Sylvia a whore, a liar, and trash. She systematically dehumanized the victim, making it easier for others to participate in the abuse. The neighborhood teens were drawn to the scene through curiosity and the transgressive thrill of participating in something forbidden. Once involved, peer pressure and loyalty to Gertrude and her children kept them participating, even when their consciences told them it was wrong. It's the same psychological mechanism that allows genocides, lynchings, and other forms of collective violence. Dehumanization of the victim plus peer pressure plus the perceived authority of a leader. Perhaps the most enigmatic in this tragedy are those who knew but failed to act, neighbors who listened, schoolmates who saw, teachers who noticed. Psychological research on the bystander effect partially explains this phenomenon. When multiple people witness an emergency, each individual is less likely to intervene, assuming someone else will. Responsibility is diffused among the group. Furthermore, in 1965, a culture of non-interference in family matters prevailed. Corporal punishment of children was common and accepted. The boundaries between what constituted appropriate discipline and what constituted abuse were blurred. The teachers who saw Sylvia with bruises likely assumed it was standard domestic punishment, not systematic torture. Neighbors who heard screams likely rationalized it as a noisy house with lots of children, not a torture chamber. It's easy to judge these witnesses in retrospect, but their failures illustrate how dependent we are on clear social and legal structures that authorize and compel us to intervene when we see suffering. The Likens case didn't end with the sentencing. It created waves of trauma that rippled through generations. Gertrude's children, even those not directly involved, grew up knowing what their mother did. Some developed their own mental health issues. Others broke away from the family altogether, changed their names, moved away, and tried to start over. Jenny Likens' children grew up knowing the story of the aunt they never met, their mother's sister who was tortured to death. They grew up witnessing their mother's pain, the nightmares, the difficult anniversaries. Paula Baniszewski's children eventually discovered who their mother really was. Imagine living your entire childhood without knowing, and then one day discovering that your mother participated in one of the most brutal crimes in American history. Trauma isn't limited to the direct victim. It spreads like circles in water, affecting everyone connected, directly or indirectly, to the event. Despite decades of analysis, certain questions about the case remain unanswered. Why Sylvia specifically? Jenny was in the same house, under the same circumstances, but she was mostly left alone. What was it about Sylvia that aroused such fury in Gertrude? When did Gertrude cross the line from abuser to lethal torturer? Was there a specific moment when she decided Sylvia had to die? Or was it a gradual escalation with no clear decision point? Why did none of the many participants break their silence while Sylvia was still alive? Dozens of people knew what was happening. How did they all keep it a secret until it was too late? These questions persist, reminding us that even the most studied events contain irreducible mysteries about human nature. Philosopher Hannah Arendt coined the phrase, the banality of evil, after observing the trial of Adolf Eichmann. She argued that extraordinary evil is often perpetrated not by monsters, but by ordinary people in specific circumstances. The Likens case perfectly illustrates this concept. Gertrude Banaszewski wasn't a supernatural demon. She was a tired, sick, overwhelmed 37-year-old woman. Paula was a pregnant, emotionally volatile teenager. Richard and Coy were neighborhood kids, not especially different from other teenagers. None of them would have been identified before the crime as potential torturers. They were ordinary people who, under a specific set of circumstances, poverty, stress, perverse group dynamics, lack of responsible adult supervision, committed acts of extraordinary evil. This realization is terrifying because it suggests that the potential for extreme cruelty resides not only in identifiable monsters, but lies dormant in seemingly ordinary people waiting for the right circumstances to manifest. The case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Under the wrong conditions, anyone could become a perpetrator, or, perhaps more relevant to most, a silent witness. What lessons, if any, can society learn from this tragedy? First, child protection systems must be proactive, not reactive. Waiting until a child dies before investigating is waiting too long. Professionals who interact with children, teachers, doctors, social workers, must be trained to recognize signs of abuse and legally required to report them. Second, the culture of silence must be broken. Neighbors who hear or see something suspicious must feel empowered and compelled to report it. Anonymous hotlines and whistleblower protections are essential. Third, the social isolation of vulnerable families is dangerous. The Banaszewski family lived in extreme poverty, with minimal support networks. Gertrude was overwhelmed and without resources. Had there been an adequate community support network, the tragedy might have been avoided. Fourth, dehumanization is a first step toward extreme violence. When someone is consistently called garbage, a prostitute, less than human, it becomes psychologically easier for others to hurt that person. We must actively guard against dehumanizing rhetoric in our own spaces. Fifth, individual responsibility persists even in group contexts. Each person who hurt Sylvia made individual choices. Peer pressure explains, but does not excuse. Maintaining moral agency even when others around us have lost theirs is critical. In the end, Sylvia Likens' case leaves us with a fundamental question about human nature. Are we fundamentally good, with evil as an aberration? Or are we fundamentally selfish, with goodness requiring conscious effort and social structure? The case provides evidence for both perspectives. It demonstrates the human capacity for unimaginable cruelty, but it also shows that such cruelty requires specific circumstances, extreme stress, systematic dehumanization, the failure of protective institutions, and the collapse of moral norms. Most people, most of the time, don't torture children. Most people, even under stress, maintain basic moral boundaries. This suggests that kindness, or at least basic decency, is our default setting. But the case also reminds us how fragile those default settings are, how quickly they can erode under pressure, how easily groups of people can be drawn into engaging in actions they would never consider individually. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. We have the capacity for both good and evil, Circumstances, social structures, individual choices all matter in determining which aspect of our nature manifests. The Likens case is a reminder to maintain vigilance over our institutions, over our communities, and over ourselves. 2007, 42 years after her death, Sylvia Likens finally receives a public memorial. A marble marker is placed on her grave in Oak Hill Cemetery in Lebanon, Indiana, replacing the simple marker that had stood there for decades. The inscription reads, Sylvia Marie Likens, January 3, 1949 to October 26, 1965. May her memory remind us of the fragility of innocence and the importance of protecting the vulnerable. The dedication ceremony is small but moving. Children's rights activists attend. Some members of the Likens family are also present. Strangers who simply know her story and want to honor her come from faraway cities. Flowers are placed. Candles are lit. Words are spoken about a girl whom no one at the ceremony knew personally, but whose story has touched everyone deeply. It's a belated but significant recognition. Sylvia is no longer just an anonymous victim in police files. She's remembered. She's honored. Her life, however brief and tragic, is affirmed as important. Sylvia Likens' story has been adapted multiple times in various forms of media, each attempting to make sense of the seemingly incomprehensible. In 1977, Kate Millett's novel, The Basement, examines a case from a feminist perspective, exploring how misogyny and patriarchal control contributed to the torture. In 2007, the film An American Crime, starring Ellen Page as Sylvia and Catherine Keener as Gertrude, brought the story to a modern audience. The film is heartbreaking yet respectful, focusing on Sylvia's humanity rather than the graphic details of her suffering. In 2008, another film titled The Girl Next Door, based on a novel of the same name by Jack Ketchum, offers a darker and more graphic fictional interpretation. Numerous documentaries, true crime podcasts, newspaper articles, and academic books have examined the case from different angles: legal, psychological, sociological, historical. Each adaptation grapples with the same ethical question: how to tell this story in a way that honors Sylvia without exploiting her suffering. How to educate the public without sensationalizing the tragedy. There's no perfect answer. But the fact that the story continues to be told suggests there's something in it that society needs to confront, process, and learn from. The impact of the Likens case on child protection policies continues to evolve decades after her death. In the 1970s and 1980s, nearly every U.S. state significantly strengthened their mandatory reporting laws. Teachers, doctors, social workers, counselors, and other professionals who work with children are now legally required to report suspected abuse. Failure to do so is in itself a crime. National hotlines were established to report child abuse. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline, founded in 1982, provides 24-hour resources for children in crisis and adults concerned about a child's well-being. Child protection services systems have been expanded and professionalized. Social workers receive better training to identify abuse, intervene appropriately, and balance family preservation with child safety. Schools implemented educational programs to teach children about good touch versus bad touch, empowering them to recognize abuse and seek help. None of these reforms are perfect. Children still fall through the cracks of the system. Abuse still occurs behind closed doors. But the protections are undeniably stronger now than they were in 1965. Sylvia's death was not in vain in that sense. Her tragedy prompted changes that have saved countless lives. Sadly, the Likens case was not unique. There have been other cases of prolonged torture of children, both before and since Sylvia. The case of Gabriel Fernandez in 2013 in California. The case of Victoria Climby in 2000 in England. The case of Elisa Izquierdo in 1995 in New York. Each involved a child tortured to death by caregivers, despite multiple warning signs and contact with child protection systems. Each case generates public outrage. Each case results in investigations into how the system failed. Each case leads to promises of never again, and yet it continues to happen. Why? Because child protection systems are chronically underfunded and overburdened. Social workers manage impossible caseloads. Resources for families in crisis are inadequate, poverty, mental illness, addiction, generational trauma. All factors that contribute to child abuse remain unaddressed in many communities. The Likens case reminds us that legal reforms are necessary but insufficient. We need deeper systemic changes, stronger economic safety nets, universal access to mental health care, more connected communities where neighbors look out for each other, and massive investment in child welfare services. The house at 3850 East New York Street no longer exists. It was demolished in 2009. The lot is now vacant, overgrown with grass, with no marker indicating what happened there. But for decades before the demolition, the house was a macabre pilgrimage site. People drove from all over the country to see it. Some were morbidly curious, fascinated by true crime tourism. Others were sincere individuals who wanted to honor Sylvia's memory. Later residents of the house reported strange phenomena, unexplained voices, a sense of presence, and a palpable sadness that permeated the rooms. Some said the basement always felt cold, even in summer. Others reported nightmares while sleeping on the second floor. Was the house haunted? That depends on individual beliefs. But there's no doubt it was marked by what happened inside. Trauma leaves impressions, if not on the physical walls, then certainly in the collective memory. After the demolition, some visitors still come to the empty lot. They leave flowers. They light candles. They sit in silence, contemplating the space where the basement where Sylvia suffered and died once stood. It is an improvised memorial, maintained not by the government but by the persistent conscience of the public. In the decades since Sylvia's death, survivors of child abuse have found in her story a reference point for their own trauma. Online forums, support groups, and therapy sessions frequently mention the Likens case. For some survivors, knowing that someone suffered something so extreme and that their story was eventually heard provides validation. Their own experiences, while perhaps not as graphically brutal, are real and deserve recognition. For others, the case serves as a warning about the dangers of silence. Many survivors struggle with guilt for not asking for help as children. Sylvia's story reminds them that silence can have lethal consequences, but also contextualizes how difficult it is for a vulnerable child to ask for help when trapped in an abusive situation. Victim advocacy organizations frequently invoke Sylvia Likens' name when advocating for stronger protections, more funding for child protective services, and stricter anti-abuse laws. His name has become a symbol not only of suffering, but of the need for vigilance, for intervention, for giving a voice to those who cannot speak for themselves. 60 years after her death, the question most frequently asked about Sylvia Likens is simple but profound. What would have become of her if her parents had never left her with Gertrude Banaszewski? If she had survived those 3 months? If someone had intervened? What life would she have lived? She was a normal teenager with normal 1965 interests. She loved music. She loved reading. She was curious about the world. She was protective of her sister. She was adaptable, resilient, able to find joy even in the difficult circumstances of traveling carnival life. Maybe she would have graduated from high school. Maybe she would have gone to college or learned a trade. Maybe she would have gotten married, had children. Maybe she would have worked as a teacher, a nurse, an artist, anything. Perhaps, like Jenny, she would have carried the trauma of her itinerant childhood, but would have found a way to build a meaningful life. We'll never know. Those possibilities were violently ripped from her in that cold basement in October of 1965. This, more than the graphic details of his torture, is perhaps the most tragic thing. Not only how he died, but everything he never lived through. Today, Sylvia Likens' name is remembered primarily in connection with her horrific death. But those who study her case seriously try to remember her as more than a victim. She was a sister who protected Jenny. She was a daughter who wrote to her parents. She was a student who attended school even while suffering. She was a teenager who dreamed of a better future. He was a complete person with thoughts, feelings, hopes, and fears. He couldn't be reduced to the moment of his death, no matter how brutal that moment was. His legacy is multiple. It's a reminder of the human capacity for cruelty, yes, but also of our responsibility to protect the vulnerable. It is a catalyst for legal and social reforms that have saved countless lives. It is a symbol for survivors of abuse seeking validation and voice. It is a warning about the dangers of silence, indifference, and dehumanization. It's a call to action for all of us. See something, say something, do something when we suspect a child is in danger. 60 years after her death, Sylvia Marie Likens is not forgotten. Her story continues to be told, not to sensationalize her suffering, but to honor her life and ensure that her death serves a greater purpose. At Oak Hill Cemetery, fresh flowers regularly appear on her grave. Strangers who never met her leave them there. It's a small but meaningful gesture. It's a way of saying, we remember you. Your life mattered. Your death meant something. You didn't die in vain. It's a way of saying, never again. It's a way of saying, rest in peace, Sylvia. You're finally safe. This documentary was constructed using verifiable information from court records, police reports, trial testimony, historical interviews, and documented newspaper sources. The events described actually occurred between July and October of 1965 in Indianapolis, Indiana. The Sylvia Marie Likens case remains one of the most brutal crimes in American history, and her story remains relevant to contemporary discussions about child protection, community responsibility, and the nature of human evil. If you suspect a child is being abused, immediately contact local child protection authorities or call Child Hope's National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453, available 24 hours a day in the United States. May Sylvia's memory inspire us to protect all vulnerable children.